Hi everyone, Martin Tyler here. There's no better place to catch up with all the news from Ligue and French football than the official Ligue 1 podcast.
Here's Neymar now, Cavani is there, Balotelli on the turn, quality, Kalufa Kamano, oh what a strike, an absolute beauty from Florian Thauvin, Kylian Mbappe wraps it up.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Le Beau Jeu podcast. Coming up in the next 40 minutes or so, PSG's title party is put on hold as Choupo-Moting decides France isn't yet ready. Lyon fans protest as Dijon plunder a nail into Bruno Genesio's coffin. 42 years without a Marseille win in Bordeaux is too much for Florian Thauvin to take. And Stevan Jovetic breaks the Guingamp hearts. Joining me in the pod this week, I have two journalists, two commentators. Opposite me, Andy Scott. How are you, Andy?
Grumpy.
Why?
Well, it's been an early start after a late finish last night, Matt.
We've all been a little bit grumpy preparing for this pod, but we're going to try to get into a good mood. Andy had a late night and
need my beauty sleep.
He's not good, only a few hours sleep. But David Crossan, I'm sure, will lighten the mood as ever.
I'm in a good mood today, Matt. It's sunny outside. The coffee that Robbie Thompson has prepared for us is very, very good.
Yes, thank you for that, Robbie. No Robbie in the podcast, but he is hosting us once again. This is the problem really with the scheduling. They have the big game at 9 p.m. local time in France.
I don't think we're going to get much sympathy here, Matt.
To be fair, it's not as bad as Spain. I remember going to a game in Spain once that kicked off at 5 past midnight, so it's not as bad as that.
No, okay, but we were at the Parc des Princes last night thinking that it was going to be an even later night because we were thinking Paris Saint-Germain were going to be celebrating the league title earlier in the afternoon. Lille were held to a draw away to Reims. That meant that PSG could clinch the title. They could equal their record of winning the league with 8 games to spare, but it didn't happen. It was an eventful night at the Parc des Princes. Here are some of the highlights.
Well played Alves and Cuckoo! And Choupo-Moting has stopped it! Unbelievable! Choupo-Moting actually stopped that ball on the line. It was going in. An outswinger. Oh, it's in! A superb strike from Gonçalves. Incredible scenes here at the Parc des Princes. Buffon beaten for the second time, and it's Strasbourg who go in front. And now the header! Carré! PSG level. And maybe they will be celebrating the title tonight. They've got about 10 minutes to try to find a winner. It'll be their second draw against PSG in the league this season, and it will cap a wonderful week for the Alsace club. Coupe de la Ligue winners last weekend. And now a point at the Parc des Princes. Paris Saint-Germain will have to wait before celebrating the 8th league title in their history. It all goes to Lille next weekend.
Well, Andy, it finished 2-2. Terrific performance by Strasbourg. I think they need to get a lot of credit. They've had an amazing week, winning the Coupe de la Ligue, beating Reims 4-0 in midweek, and then getting that draw at the Parc des Princes. You were there. How did you enjoy the evening? First of all, a word about the team selection. It was a little bit surprising because PSG are missing Neymar, Cavani, and Di Maria through injury, and yet Tuchel left his talisman Kylian Mbappe on the bench from the start.
Yeah, I mean, he was asked about this in his press conference after the game, and he was actually quite tetchy. I think there were several reasons why he wasn't in a great mood. One of them being a slight confrontation he had with Laurent Paganelli, the Canal Plus touchline reporter, after the game, but various other reasons as well. And of course, the result in itself, which denied them the title.
There's something in the air at the moment. We're all a bit tetchy.
There obviously is, yeah, clearly. But in his press conference after the game, he was obviously asked about Mbappe, and he didn't appreciate it. I mean, his answer was, it made perfect sense. The guy who's, let's not forget, only 20, has played a lot of football recently. He's played 90 minutes in, Tuchel said 9 consecutive games for club and country, I guess. I've not checked that myself, but in any case, he has played a lot of games. Hasn't had many chances to rest. And this was an opportunity. Maybe it wasn't the best game in which to do it, but Mbappe can't play every minute of every game, and it just exposes the sort of weakness or lack of depth in the PSG squad again, which Tuchel is always talking about.
Just talk us through the Choupo-Moting thing, because we heard the commentary there. To be fair to Choupo-Moting, he scored the opening goal. Strasbourg then equalised, and it was 1-1. And it was just one of the most bizarre things I've seen on a football pitch, Andy.
Yeah, it's funny. I was sitting in the press box of the Parc des Princes, and a colleague of mine, we kind of looked at each other after it, just couldn't believe what had happened. I mean, I've been to a lot of football games, and I've never seen anything like that. I mean, it was a brilliant goal line clearance. It's the best way you can describe it. The ball was not exactly flying in, but it was going in, and he contrives to stop it. And it's just the latest episode in a slightly unfortunate career at PSG for Eric-Maxime Choupo-Moting, isn't it? And Thomas Tuchel, after the game, again was asked about this, and he talked about him lacking confidence, which you need to play in the PSG first team on a regular basis. But it was kind of an acceptance that the guy's not good enough to play for a team of that level, I think, which is a bit harsh, but it makes him a laughing stock, unfortunately, that miss, which is harsh, but it's
I think you're being a bit harsh, because I think Choupo-Moting has made a pretty good impression, and I've got a lot of time for him because he's basically been brought in as a substitute, and he's been a positive influence, I think, on the training ground, in the dressing room, and his performances haven't been that bad, but it was bizarre. Just for those who haven't seen it, Nkunku chipped the goalkeeper, it sort of deflected, but the ball was going to roll over the line, and then Choupo-Moting, you could see he didn't quite know what to do. It was like he'd been possessed by some kind of power, and he just stopped the ball on the line.
But I think one of the things with that is that when you see any top-level player playing football, you think, wow, this is brilliant what they're doing. They make it look so easy, but actually what they're doing is really difficult. But when you see what Choupo-Moting did, it's one of these things where you know that if you'd done that in a game in a park, you'd be laughed at. That's the beauty of football. It's harsh on Choupo-Moting. You're right. I mean, obviously the guy has not. He's actually a very good player.
You'd be beaten up, wouldn't you, by the guy who had the shot that was going in?
This is the thing, and unfortunately,
I'm not playing five-a-side with you again, man. I've seen some pretty odd things when we've played our matches together. Football journalists tend to be quite bad at football, Robbie Thompson accepted. I understand why Tuchel brought in Choupo-Moting, because they know each other from before. They worked together at Mainz, and there are very few international footballers who will accept the role of being the fringe player and be patient on the bench and have that good team spirit and that positive attitude. And he has become something of a cult figure among the Paris Saint-Germain supporters, but that is to do with his limitations as a player as well. He has actually scored, I think, 3 goals in his last 6 games for club and country. But there's a reason why that Choupo-Moting miss has gone around the world, and at least he had the courage to front up to the press afterwards.
Yeah, but that was even more bizarre, because he tried to explain what had happened, and it was like he was still confused. He was saying, well, I thought Nkunku maybe was going to pass the ball to me, then I thought I was offside, and then the ball hit the post. What are you talking about?
I mean, I think he did maybe think he was offside when you see it.
But then why touch it?
Well, I know. Yeah, I don't know. It's inexplicable. There's no way really of explaining what happened. It's just one of these things, and it's just such a shame, because ultimately, in the cold light of day, it's, if they'd gone 2-1 up, they probably would have gone on to win the game, and of course events unfolded in the opposite direction, and they've missed out. So he's made to look even more foolish. But the guy, he's a cult hero, but he was also, he was booed off, and it was a really, it was quite unpleasant when he came off, just in the second half.
You talked about Thomas Tuchel being tetchy after the game. He certainly was. He was sent off in the second half as well for complaining, and another just explanation, just to develop a little bit what you mentioned, because Laurent Paganelli annoyed him. Now, Laurent Paganelli, for those who don't know him, he's a cult figure really in France. He's been doing touchline reporting for Canal Plus for decades. A former player at Saint-Etienne, and he's kind of half journalist, half comedian. I think it's fair to say that he spends a lot of the time laughing and joking. I remember actually when he went up to David Beckham when Beckham was playing for PSG and was on the bench, and he just looked absolutely flabbergasted, Beckham, by this guy who was coming up and chuckling and trying to speak English to him, and Beckham was like, I'm trying to watch the game. But he does bring this sort of comedy element, and basically he'd I think been given Dimitri Liénard's shirt after the game, and he was conducting his interview with the Strasbourg goalkeeper Mats Seltz, who was brilliant, by the way, in that game. with the shirt on, and Thomas Tuchel, quite annoyed, obviously, that his side hadn't won, saw this journalist in a Strasbourg shirt and said, what are you doing in the Parc des Princes here, apparently celebrating a Strasbourg draw. But
I mean, he's not to everybody's taste. At least I think when you come from outside France, maybe it takes a bit of getting used to the way that Laurent Paganelli conducts himself on the touchline. That's one way of putting it. Yeah,
he can be annoying, but I've got a bit of respect as well, or a lot of respect for the way he interacts with the players, and the players generally love him.
That's one of the things that when you come from the UK, for example, we're not used really to seeing a touchline reporter asking questions to players in the dugout during the game. It's a very different way of sort of doing the whole thing. But yeah, Laurent Paganelli clearly upset Thomas Tuchel.
They've PSG. They're going to be champions. We know that. They've got 8 games left to play. Next Sunday, they travel to Lille. If they avoid defeat, they will be champions. If they don't avoid defeat, then I'm sure they'll be champions the following week. But Thomas Tuchel isn't completely satisfied with life. We know that they've had disappointments in the Coupe de la Ligue and especially in the Champions League. They've got a Coupe de France final to look forward to against Rennes. But the fact that, yes, he's having to rest Mbappe, he's only naming 5 substitutes. We've seen this a few times this season. It's almost like he's making a statement to the club saying, I don't have enough players, because he could quite easily put some kids on the bench to fill up the positions. Do you think that Thomas Tuchel is justified in telling the Paris Saint-Germain board that it hasn't been good enough in terms of the recruitment, particularly, I would say, in the midfield this season?
He is justified, and I'm still yet to be convinced that Paredes is the solution to all of Paris Saint-Germain's midfield problems, despite some promise that he's shown after joining from Zenit St. Petersburg. Now, at the start of the season, Tuchel was getting a massive amount of credit for giving these players that have come through the PSG youth system or been signed very young and come to Paris just to hone their talent a chance. That Timothy Weah played a bit at the start of the season before being loaned to Celtic, and Moussa Diaby we saw played very well at times. Colin Dagba's played some, and Paris Saint-Germain need to get these youth products into the team and getting some action. But by naming a limited number of outfield players, there's a very clear message from Tuchel that they need to get more strength in depth into this squad, that it is a lopsided squad, that the midfield needs addressing. And when those stars aren't there, and any team in the world would struggle if you didn't have the quartet of players available with Mbappe on the bench and Cavani, Neymar and Di Maria injured. But there's work to do in the summer. Everyone knows this.
Paris Saint-Germain are bossing this league. They are 20 points clear still. One of the big problems, if you like, in terms of the competitiveness bit of franglais coming in there of this league, is that the other big teams have struggled this season, and we saw it again at the weekend. Lyon have had a disastrous week, and it was capped off by their defeat at home against Dijon, a defeat that was watched by David Crossan.
And Malfitano, former Newcastle United player, to Saïd. And the shot comes in, it takes a deflection, and Dijon are in front. A huge deflection on the shot. Lyon 1, Dijon 2, as things just get worse and worse for Genesio and OL. Listen to the boos ringing around Groupama Stadium.
Well, David, it was an incredible match, and in particular an incredible opening to the match. 3 goals in the first 7 minutes. Lyon actually got off to a good start, Martin Terrier scoring. What happened next, and what went wrong for Lyon?
After 37 seconds, when Terrier tapped the ball in from a cornet cross, Genesio, the coach, looked so happy because he'd brought those players into the team after the disappointment of the home Coupe de France semi-final exit to Rennes in midweek. But then the defensive problems resurfaced. Marcelo, the vice-captain, the Brazilian defender, is having a really tough 2019, and he was at fault for the first Dijon goal in particular. There was a bit of bad luck with the deflection off Marcelo for the Saïd strike for the second one. Raphael was struggling at left back. Dijon at times could basically just walk through the centre of the park, and we've already spoken about Lyon's midfield problems. And that's despite them having such talent in that area. Ndombele was left on the bench at the weekend. For me, Toussaint is really struggling now. He's not come through the way people expected. He looked so mature when he was playing every game after Maxime Gonalon was sold a couple of years ago. But now I think his career's gone backwards. Aouar, like Marcelo, is also having a tougher time in 2019. Players aren't performing at their best, and they're not being saved by the goal scorers in the way that they were when they had that run of 9 wins in 10 games at the end of last season in order to get into the Champions League.
But are they not being helped also by everything that's going on around the club? Because it's been a disastrous week. They were dumped out of the Coupe de France by Rennes in the semi-finals at home, and there was just a huge media circus around this game because it had been leaked by the press that Lyon were going to announce a decision regarding Bruno Genesio's future. The coach, it was expected, was about to extend his contract because at the weekend, he'd basically let on that he knew what the decision was going to be, and he said that with a big smile, and everybody thought, okay, he's going to get a contract extension. Lyon lost at home to Rennes, and then we had this just surreal episode where Aulas and Genesio came into the press conference together, sat down, and Jean-Michel Aulas announced that Genesio was not going to get his contract extended. His contract is running out at the end of the season. It hasn't yet been decided as to whether he will be kept on or not. It's looking highly unlikely, but it was embarrassing. He was like a naughty schoolboy sitting next to Jean-Michel Aulas. Andy, it hasn't been helpful, has it? And the atmosphere around the Dijon game, the fans were pretty hostile towards their own players.
Yeah, I mean, I was in Lyon last midweek for the cup game against Rennes, and the atmosphere was very strange. There was this something in the air. Just everything seemed to be sort of waiting for this announcement after the game about Bruno Genesio's future, almost as though the game itself was a sideshow, even though it wasn't. You knew that the result of this game would have some kind of impact, even just on the reaction of the supporters. And it was very strange as soon as the game finished, because you had Jean-Michel Aulas heading straight into the auditorium at the stadium there in Lyon to give his press conference with Bruno Genesio. And at the same time, the ultras, the hardcore supporters left behind in the stadium were calling for Genesio to go, just at this point where you thought, well, maybe Aulas is still going to announce this extension of his contract. In the end, there's no way that he could do that in the wake of the result, which, by the way, losing to Rennes in a cup semi-final is hardly a disgrace. But you mentioned the form of Marcelo. He was at fault for a couple of the goals against Rennes. They've got a lot of problems they need to sort out. I don't think Jean-Michel Aulas, he clearly doesn't know if he wants to, if he thinks Genesio is the right man.
Just to sort of clarify the situation even further after Matt's very good explanation, that it was going to be a 2-year automatic contract extension if Lyon made the cup final and finished in the top 3. So what Aulas was claiming in the auditorium was that the contract wasn't going to be signed there and then. It was still conditioned on, in any case, whether they got through to the final or not. It was going to be conditioned on whether they finished in the top 3 come the end of the season.
But why didn't he clear that up before? Because the whole country was led to believe, and the Lyon fans were led to believe, that the decision was on Tuesday. And by all accounts, that's what Bruno Genesio thought, even though he hasn't said that.
Yeah, the 7 days have been really difficult. They approached that week with massive optimism, expecting to be in a Coupe de France final against PSG and to start putting pressure on Lille. They end the week in disarray. And we spoke last week about Marseille being at the end of a cycle, potentially. That's what their president said. Well, Lyon have that end of cycle feel now, not just in terms of Genesio, the coach, but also in terms of the future of several of the players. And that's something that the supporters were alluding to with their banners at the weekend, saying if you're thinking about other clubs, go and mess them up, basically, was the message.
It's going to be hard for them well, they're bound to lose. We spoke a few weeks ago, they're bound to lose 2 or 3 important, very talented young players in the summer. But actually, in a way, they've not come out of this weekend too badly because of the Lille result, bearing in mind that Lille, as we said, play Paris Saint-Germain next weekend. It could have been worse. You know, they're 5 points behind. There's a possibility that will be down to 2 again next weekend, and then suddenly the outlook is a little bit different, even if it's been a disastrous last week for them.
But Dave, you touched on the reaction of the supporters and the banners. There were a lot of banners, and throughout this season, there's been sort of hostile attitude from sections of the supporters towards Bruno Genesio. We had the fans protesting by being silent for 7 minutes, 7 minutes of silence for 7 years without a trophy. There were big hopes in Lyon that they were going to end that drought with the Coupe de France. And to be honest with you, it's something that we see a lot in France, and I think it's something that is positive and should be encouraged, that the supporters feel part of this project and participate in the life of a football club. And I think Jean-Michel Aulas has been incredibly supportive and patient of Bruno Genesio. Yes, results haven't been too bad, but there have been some obvious lapses, and he's always backed Bruno Genesio, despite the supporters saying, we want a more established, a bigger name coach to coach these big players. And just one thing that I found interesting, Jean-Michel Aulas met personally every single Lyon supporter group. I think there are around about 20 supporter groups, even the smaller ones, and he discussed the coaching situation with them. And you don't see that in certain countries. You certainly don't see that in England, where you have a club president meeting face-to-face with all these different supporter groups. Now, you could say, well, these fans are spoiled. Do they deserve, do they have a right to be winning trophies every year, Lyon? But, Jean-Michel Aulas, he has his knockers. He has plenty of them in France. But I think if you're a Lyon fan, you have to admire and you have to appreciate having this guy at the head of your football club. David, are you agreeing with that?
Right, what Aulas did with getting the new stadium as well is incredible in France. It's very difficult to do these big projects when the finance is private rather than coming through public funding. So that was incredible. In terms of the trophies, everyone knows that with Paris Saint-Germain around, it's much harder to win them. So 7 years without a trophy, it is too long for Lyon, considering they had their 7 titles in a row through to 2008. But they've held their position up there in the top echelons of the French game. It was like 3 years ago, wasn't it, when they finished 31 points back from PSG in second, but at least they have been consistently getting themselves into the top positions in Ligue 1 and bringing players through the youth system and playing some good football at times. The problem this season has been the inconsistency. I can understand the fans' frustration.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, really, that they have been consistently up there, but there's still a feeling that they could have done more. They've been knocked out of cup competitions in such disappointing fashion, not just this season, but in previous years. You look at Strasbourg going on to win the League Cup, and that could have been Lyon. And okay, the League Cup is maybe not the same as winning the league, but it would be a huge boost to the club to win some silverware. They're
25 points behind PSG, and that should not be the case.
No,
it's time, isn't it, to get in a top-name manager.
Well,
reports. Sorry, Andy. In L'Equipe this morning, that reports that Lyon are talking to Laurent Blanc, and they're sounding out Laurent Blanc. Of course, we've heard the links with Jose Mourinho. We've even had a link to Hervé Renard, which perhaps economically speaking is more realistic than Jose Mourinho. Is it time to go foreign? Is it time for Lyon to get a big-name foreign manager?
I'm not sure about that. I think with
Scottish manager, Andy.
Well, Scottish managers have been brilliant in the past. We're just looking for the next great one to come through. But yeah, I mean, just on Genesio, finally, it's quite extraordinary the reaction in a way of the supporters, because here's a Lyon man, an ex-Lyon player who's been on the staff at the club for a long time before taking over the team. In a way, you'd think that the fans would be supportive of him, while perhaps accepting that they might want a bigger name. But yeah, I think you look at Lyon and you think there's obviously great potential there. They could actually be doing a lot more than they are. And I think it's understandable that the supporters want to make that next step and they don't quite feel that Bruno Genesio is the man to do that.
I think Aulas is scarred a little bit by the Claude Puel experience, that Puel came in 2008 and was given more power than the previous coaches. He was more like a manager in an English sense, that he dictated the transfer policy. And even though they made the Champions League semi-finals, which is as far as they've ever gone a couple of years later, it didn't go well. They were trophyless seasons. And I don't think Aulas wants to hand over that sort of power or money to a big-name coach. And indeed, he did a long interview with L'Equipe the day after that Tuesday night press conference, and he said Jose Mourinho, the special one, is not compatible with the club's economics. He did describe Laurent Blanc as having a good profile for the club. Whether that goes through or not, I'm really not sure. But Blanc's been out of the game now for 3 years anyway, so a risk.
Well, life for a Lyon supporter could be worse. You could be a Marseille supporter. Marseille beaten again, and just when it looked like their season was picking up and they were going to end with a flourish, they lost at PSG. They drew at home to Angers, And now they have lost away to Bordeaux. They always seem to lose away to Bordeaux. 42 years in a row now. Andy Scott was bringing us the action from the Matmut Atlantique.
Here is Nicolas de Préville into the penalty box, gets his shot away. It's a beautifully taken goal by Nicolas de Préville. It's 2-0. Dimitri Payet can barely look. Bordeaux just love it at home against Marseille. They've done it again tonight. A 2-0 win. It's now 34 games unbeaten at home to OM.
Well, it is that absolutely astonishing. Marseille haven't won at Bordeaux since 1977, and that was a very special year. It was the year that Virginia Wade won Wimbledon for Britain, and it was the year that Matthew Spiro was born. But for Marseille supporters, it's too long, isn't it? And it's an incredible stat because Marseille are a huge football club. It's not like we're saying, oh, Guingamp haven't won at Strasbourg for 42 years. Marseille have won league titles in that time, but they just can't do it. And you do wonder, is it something psychological? They turn up at Bordeaux and think this is going to be a tough night.
I think more than it being perhaps a psychological thing for Marseille, it's 42 years, but it's 34 games in the top flight, so maybe it's not quite as bad as it sounds. But yes, 34 games is still an incredibly long time for one team to go unbeaten in a particular fixture. I think it's more a psychological thing the other way around for Bordeaux because, I've actually commentated this game, I think, in the last 3 seasons now, bizarrely, and actually the previous 2 games ended in draws, and even that, the Bordeaux fans were delighted. Last year, Marseille scored a 94th minute equaliser, but it didn't matter. They were all celebrating at the end of the game. There's this banner in the stands at the Matmut Atlantique with the date, the 1st of October 1977, the last time that Bordeaux lost in this fixture. And the Bordeaux fans were at the training ground on the day before the game saying that, with a banner saying defeat forbidden in this match. Bordeaux are in mid-table, not having a great season, of course, lots of turmoil on and off the field, but this is the one game that unites the fans and the players together.
They're big rivals, these two clubs, aren't they? And that was kind of born in the 1980s when Bordeaux had Claude Bez as the president and Bernard Tapie then came to Marseille, and they became the 2 biggest and best clubs in France.
Yeah, those 42 years, obviously Marseille in that time have won several league titles, the Champions League. Bordeaux won 5 league titles in that time as well. And, they might not be one of the very biggest clubs in France at the moment in terms of what they're doing on the field, but they have been at points in those last 4 decades. So it's never really been an easy place to go. Actually, Bordeaux's home record has been pretty solid throughout the last couple of seasons, despite their inconsistencies. But I just think this is a psychological thing for Marseille, but mainly for Bordeaux, that they know that they really have to get a result in this game. And, it's Paulo Sousa's first win, and I think it was made clear to him the importance of getting a result in this match. And it's just given them, it was sort of the one target left for them this season, to get a win under Paulo Sousa, to get that first win under their belt, and to make sure they didn't lose that fixture.
They'd had 3 draws in Sousa's first 3 games, the win against Marseille. Tell me about the actual game. It finished 2-0 to Bordeaux. They were deserved winners.
Yeah, I would say so. It's a long time ago now, Friday night, isn't it? I'm struggling to remember what happened, but yeah. Florian Thauvin admitted after the game, very frankly, he said we were rubbish, didn't he? And I think that kind of summed it up. Bordeaux started well, as they always do, and then, of course, they were gifted the penalty. This bizarre handball by Nemanja Radonjic, who was starting for Marseille, hasn't obviously started many games this season. Actually, it's worth mentioning the team selection by Rudy Garcia, because we know that their revival prior to the recent international break was maybe not as a result of, but coincided with the changes in his team. He dropped Dimitri Payet, Luis Gustavo, Adil Rami hasn't been playing. Payet actually came back in for this game, started the match's first start since the 20th of January, I think. Luis Gustavo was again on the bench, but there were changes. There was no Balotelli in the starting lineup, no Lucas Ocampos at all. And Marseille were sort of all at sea. Radonjic giving away the penalty, and then the second goal coming just after Mario Balotelli had come off the bench. There was a spell early in the second half where Marseille threatened to get the equaliser. They find themselves 2-0 down, and then the last 20 minutes are dominated by Mario Balotelli winding up the Bordeaux defenders and getting Pablo sent off with a bleeding nose after their earlier clash on the field. But Bordeaux held on.
And just about that Florian Thauvin interview, because I actually thought it was brilliant, and I know a lot of Marseille fans appreciate it because they're fed up of hearing the same old excuses. We were a bit unlucky. And Thauvin, he came out into the mixed zone to talk to journalists, and he started saying, well, we made a promising start to the game. I'm not sure if their penalty should have been a penalty. I think maybe we could have had a penalty. And then he just stopped and he said, I'm talking rubbish, guys. It's time to stop making excuses. We were rubbish. We didn't deserve any more than this, and our season's just going down the pan, and it's the same story every season. And he's been criticised in some quarters because people are saying, well, actually, you're not being very kind to your teammates by basically saying this season is a write-off. But I found it quite refreshing, Dave, from the former Newcastle ace.
Thanks for mentioning former Newcastle. Otherwise, I'd have had to have done it myself. No, it is refreshing. We complain all the time when players are media trained to within an inch of their lives and they don't tell us anything and they're incredibly dull. So for someone to actually come out and say what they think is good. People will point at Thauvin's own form, though, and say that he got to 12 goals really quickly this season, but he's only got 1 in his last 8 or something like that. Hasn't been scoring since Balotelli's come in, even if they have struck up a good understanding off the pitch especially. And people will also be saying, is Thauvin only saying this now because he wants out of the club in the summer and he's just preparing his way for a departure, having once said that he wanted to be to Marseille what Francesco Totti was to Roma? Is he after Champions League football next season elsewhere? Because he went on in this interview to say, well, what's the point in us qualifying for the Champions League? What will we do with this team if we did manage to get into the Champions League?
Now, just before we move on and talk about more former Newcastle players, you can email questions to us and we would very much welcome them. Our email address is ligue1podcast@gmail.com. That's LIGUE1, the number, podcast@gmail.com. So, Marseille still in 5th. They haven't lost too much ground because actually none of the top 6 won this weekend, which was quite bizarre. Saint-Etienne are still in 4th position, but they very nearly lost away to Amiens. Luckily, the ex-Magpie Remy Cabella scored a brilliant goal in the dying seconds. Meanwhile, Rennes also drew thanks to a magician of a former Newcastle player, Hatem Ben Arfa, and it was a sensational goal that Hatem Ben Arfa scored. It finished 3-3 in what was a cracking game between Rennes and Angers. But for me, this was the goal of the weekend. Ben Arfa started sort of turning in circles in the middle of the pitch, and you thought, what's he doing? But then he just sort of kept going, and he dribbled around about 6-7 players. Played a 1-2, was it with Mbaye Nyong?
It was with Nyong, yeah.
With Nyong crossed it, and Ben Arfa scored. And it was a delightful moment, and I guess you were feeling nostalgic, David.
The only surprise to me was that he passed the ball. I thought he was just going to go all the way himself. And Newcastle fans will remember special goals he scored against Blackburn and Bolton, and they were a bit like those. I highly recommend getting onto the official YouTube channel and watching Hatem Ben Arfa's goal. He also scored a penalty in that game, and in 2019 he's got back to something like the standards that he showed at Nice when he scored 17 goals in that season that persuaded Paris Saint-Germain to recruit him. And it's very exciting that he's in this form, given that Rennes are going to be playing PSG in the Coupe de France final at the end of the month.
When you said a minute ago about Florian Thauvin, about how it's refreshing to hear the way he speaks, Hatem Ben Arfa gave a really good interview to L'Equipe last week, just before they played Lyon in the Cup semi-final. I thought it was fascinating reading what he said, talking about how everything he does on the pitch is about the art of the lie, like fooling the opposition defender into thinking he's going to play the ball there and then going the other way, or make the run there, then go the other way. I thought it was really fascinating as an insight into how Hatem Ben Arfa plays his game. And when he's in the mood, he's still a brilliant player to watch. And there is that hope that he and Rennes can give PSG a real game in the Cup final. That result against Angers doesn't do their chances of qualifying for Europe via the League too much good.
No, because they're mid-table, 42 points. They're 8 points off 4th. If they're going to get into Europe, they might have to beat Paris Saint-Germain in the Cup final. But when you think about how Rennes' season was so exciting, a few weeks ago, I think it was episode 1 or episode 2 of the podcast, we were all getting excited about Rennes. They just knocked Betis out of the Europa League and beaten Arsenal 3-1 at home. But they're a bit short, aren't they, in terms of quality? I mean, I'm still impressed with what Julien Stéphan has done. And I would like to think that he can build on that through the summer. But to Dave or Andy, do they have to keep Ben Arfa, do you think, to move forward, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. That Ben Arfa's fantastic to watch, and his highlights video on your well-known video platforms makes for incredible viewing. But watch him over 90 minutes, and Newcastle supporters, if they're honest with themselves, will remember this. He can be incredibly frustrating. That you need to build your team around him. He tries to dribble the ball out of defence, often gives it away, and this was happening even in those European victories. And he plays his own team into trouble, can sometimes look disinterested. I don't think he's been a disruptive influence in the dressing room at Rennes, which is something that's been levelled at him throughout his career. So do they necessarily need him? No, not necessarily. I do think they need to keep Mbaye-Niang, who's hit his scoring form recently and will be available for what in the current market is a reasonable price. About 15 to 20 million has been quoted.
Well, Angers are pretty much safe with that point. They're also up in mid-table. And last week we all named a young player to watch out for. Since we did that, Boulaye Dia of Reims has barely played, and that was Robbie's suggestion.
He started yesterday.
Did he? Okay. William Saliba, my tip, hasn't played, and Robbie's saying, oh, well, Matt Saliba.
And former Newcastle man Loic Remy was picked ahead of Raphael Leao for Lille.
So we're cursing these guys, but we're not going to do the same, because it's just unfair on these youngsters. We're putting too much pressure on them. But I'm going to talk about a kid who came good this weekend. Jeff Adelaide, 21 years of age.
Who did he used to play for, Matt?
He used to play for Arsenal. He didn't play much. He played 8 games for Arsenal, but he was signed by Arsene Wenger as a 17-year-old. And there was all sorts of excitement and stories about how this kid was going to be the next sensation. It didn't happen for him. He never really looked the part, to be honest with you. He played mainly in the League Cup for Arsenal. But he moved to Angers, I think it was in January of last year. So he's had just over a full season all in all. And it's taken him 40-odd games to get his first goals. But he is a support striker. He can play out wide, he can play in midfield, and he's actually done pretty well. He's actually played pretty well for Stéphane Moulin's team this season, and I just think 2 goals and an assist at the weekend. He might be up and running now. This fella, Jeffrey Adelaide, he's only 21 years of age. He's playing for the France under-21s. Some players take longer than others in terms of their development. I've just got a feeling. Let's watch Jeffrey Adelaide in the next few weeks, and we'll see if he can build on those 2 goals. We're going to move on now and talk about the relegation battle quickly, because things have changed once again at the bottom. A tremendous win. We talked about Dijon winning 3-1 at Lyon. That's propelled them up to 18th. Guingamp were very, very close to claiming another scalp, but as Armel Tanguy saw for us at the weekend, they didn't quite hold out against Monaco.
Gone very deep. Plenty of red shirts back. It's Silla this time. Vinicius. Chilabocci stopping him, and Monaco have got the goal. It's oh so cruel for the home side. But it's Stevan Jovetic. And the Rougarou has been silenced in the 94th minute. And Guingamp's evening has been ruined.
Yes, Stevan Jovetic back, and among the goals for Monaco. That's actually a pretty important goal for Monaco, because they're not out of the woods quite yet. Had they lost to Guingamp, they obviously would have been in even bigger trouble. Let me just give you a quick recap of the situation now. Arguably 6 clubs are still threatened by relegation. You've got Guingamp and Caen, who are bottom with 23 points each. Guingamp bottom on goal difference. Dijon, with their win over Lyon, have moved up to 18th. Now, that is significant, of course, because 18th position isn't automatic relegation in France. It's a playoff against the team that wins the playoff to finish third in Ligue 2. It's all a bit complicated. But and then just above the bottom 3, you've got Nantes, Monaco and Amiens. Now, they're all on 31 points, so they're 7 points above Dijon, which looks fairly comfortable, but Nantes are not winning. Amiens, they've been picking up a few points, but you never know. You never know. If Dijon, Caen, Guingamp can string a run together, then perhaps this will become a 6 team battle. What do you think, fellas? Do you think it's basically between Dijon, Caen and Guingamp, or are those other three still in danger?
Well, I did my homework on the Metro this morning, given to me by producer Ian. I looked at the fixtures left for the teams down at the bottom, and I tallied up the likely points that each of them will win. And I think there's next to no chance. In fact, there is no chance that the current bottom three will change. I think the only question is who will get a second chance in the playoff. There's one big game between Caen and Dijon, I think I'm right in saying, to come in the next few weeks, which could be particularly important in that regard. I think the bottom three at the moment will remain the bottom three, and I think if you're asking for an opinion on who is going to go down, who should go down automatically, I would say that Caen have been the most disappointing team that I've seen this season. And I think that win at Monaco last weekend, as good as it was, will probably ultimately be in vain.
Is that why you were late, Andy? Did you miss your stop on the Metro? Or
I got off and I sat in the Jardin des Tuileries for a short while and just looked pensively into the sky and thought about it deeply.
Dave, of those three, Dijon, Caen and Guingamp, which team would you miss in Ligue 1? Which team would you like to see stay up?
I think regular listeners know that most of us have a soft spot for Guingamp, so I would like to see Guingamp stay up.
I have a soft spot for Dijon. I think I like the town. Really nice town. Brilliant wine and
mustard,
snails, and obviously mustard. I've actually been to a moutarderie where they explain how mustard is made, and met a really nice chap actually who ran it. He gave me free mustard. I still have some in my fridge. But also they play good football under. Well, they used to play good football under Andy's shaking his head. They used to play good football under Dalloglio. He was sacked before Christmas. Antoine Kombouaré has come in and is in danger of contributing to 2 relegations because he was Guingamp coach at the start of the season. He's now Dijon coach, and it's not going well for Antoine. Although it went better at the weekend with that terrific victory.
Yeah, which they needed. I think if they'd lost that game, obviously it just would have, which we expected, it would have left them in an even more difficult position. He's at a difficult time. It's always hard to have an impact when you come into a struggling team like that midway through a season. And you know, in hindsight, it does look a bit odd that Dijon went for a man who was going backwards at Guingamp, another struggling club.
I've got a theory. I think Antoine Kombouaré has got a lucky baseball cap now. He was wearing it at Lyon at the weekend, and we know that when you're trying to avoid relegation in France, you often turn to a firefighter wearing, as they're known over here, wearing a baseball cap. It's usually Ali Bope. I think now that he's got the baseball cap on, he needs to wear it for every game until the end of the season to give Dijon a chance.
One thing that always intrigues me with Antoine Kombouaré, who's this stalwart of the French game, is he played in Scotland, didn't he, Andy? I don't know if you...
It's funny you said that. I was just thinking about the first time I saw Antoine Kombouaré playing against this brilliant team, Dundee United at Tannadice in the mid-1990s, when we hammered Aberdeen, I think 4 or 5-0.
Yeah, he played for Aberdeen. And played for a top PSG side in the 90s that won
this is the thing. I mean, back then, I hadn't really seen much of Antoine Kombouaré previously, and actually he'd only just been playing for PSG in a fine team and came along and played in a dreadful Aberdeen side.
If you want to know more about Antoine Kombouaré or any Ligue 1 figure, whether it's a coach or whether you've got anything to ask us about Ligue 1, you can email us at ligue1podcast@gmail.com. Our email address, LIGUE, that's how you spell league in French, 1, the number, podcast@gmail.com, and we will answer your questions. We have a question from a listener, David Clements. An interesting question this. He says, with Paris FC sitting 3rd in Ligue 2 at the moment and on course perhaps for a promotion playoff, is there a possibility that we could see a rivalry in Paris between Paris Saint-Germain and Paris FC? It's funny, isn't it, how Paris just has one top club. You compare it with London, most big European cities, certainly European capitals. Dave, would there be a rivalry if Paris FC do win promotion?
Technically, with 2 clubs in the same city, but it wouldn't be a rivalry, no. And the problem when it comes to second Paris clubs has always been getting enough fans to go and watch them, and this was the case even in the mid-1980s when Matra Racing were more credible challengers to Paris Saint-Germain's dominance of the capital, and they had some fine players, actually.
It must be possible, Dave. It must be the reservoir of people, the population of Greater Paris and the love for football here.
Well, that's the discrepancy, isn't it? That the Paris region is the hotbed of world football, produced more players at the World Cup than any other region in the world. But there's not the same culture of going to sports events in Paris that there is in London, especially, or in other major European cities. So look at the crowds that Paris FC are getting at Stade Charlotte, which is not my favourite stadium because it's got a running track around it, and so you feel really far from the action. It's windy, and even when they played Red Star, another Paris region club, they only got 8,000 people at that game. It would be different if they played against Paris Saint-Germain, of course, but it would be mainly full of Paris Saint-Germain fans. It was the same with Matra Racing in the 1980s. At times, their crowds dropped to 7,000. The two rugby clubs have a similar problem. There's probably only enough space for one of Stade Francais and one of
They need
Racing.
a good name. They just need a club with a good name now. I mean, Matra Racing's not going to attract fans. Paris FC is hardly original.
I think one of the things is that obviously we talk about Paris from outside France, and we kind of refer to the region as a whole, whereas here in France, obviously Paris is very much Paris, and then everything that is outside the ring road is not Paris. And Red Star obviously are a club who we think of as being from Paris. They actually come from the northern suburbs. If they were ever in the top flight, I think there really would be a rivalry in terms of identity. They could not be further removed from Paris Saint-Germain. Sadly, they're at the bottom of the second division and have one or two problems. I was actually at Stade Charlotte for the game against Paris FC just before Christmas. And you said there weren't many people there. It was the biggest crowd of the season. It was 8,000. There was about 2,000 Red Star fans. It was a brilliant atmosphere. And Red Star scored a 96th minute equaliser, which was a shock result because Paris FC are doing very well. But yeah, Paris FC, to give it a bit of history, effectively, they were the same club, weren't they? Then there was a separation between what is now Paris Saint-Germain and what is now Paris FC in the 1970s, back when Marseille were winning games in Bordeaux. And basically, there's now this prospect that they could be playing each other in the top flight, but it still seems there's a long way to go to get to that. They have to come through the playoffs, which would mean winning 3 matches to get there, and then they've obviously got a very long way to go before they could compete with Paris
And they need
Saint-Germain.
real money as well. And even the Racing team, they signed people like Enzo Francescoli, Pierre Litbarski, David Ginola played for them in a Coupe de France final, and they still weren't getting massive crowds, even though they were a high-profile team.
Guys, you're negative. It's Paris.
No, I think
you must be able to get money. You must be able to get support.
But there were competing attractions. I see you at the
remember.
theatre every Tuesday, Matt, and then on Wednesday you've got other things to do.
There's a lot on at the cinema at the moment as well.
I think it's true. I think it's true that if they were in the top flight, the crowds would multiply several times over. And Paris FC do have actually ambitious owners with a lot of money behind them. They've just built a new training ground out near Orly Airport. They're a club who are developing, and I think obviously if they're in the top flight, they can attract even better players. And yes, a rivalry would develop, but I'm just saying I think we're a long way from.
I remember, Andy. I remember reading a story maybe 15 years ago or so that Bernard Tapie was planning to launch a football club in Paris, and he said we're going to play our home games at the Stade de France, and we're going to put Paris Saint-Germain in their place. He's obviously a big rival in terms of hating Paris Saint-Germain. He's stoked that kind of big rivalry between Marseille and PSG back in Marseille's heyday. And I just thought that would be fantastic. And maybe you need somebody with the charisma. I mean, say what you like about Bernard Tapie. I know he's not everybody is a fan, but he has charisma, he has ambition, and surely somebody can do that. Somebody can launch a Parisian club. We're running out of time, fellas, and I do want to finish with our lovely little Bon Voyage segment. So we're going to look ahead to next weekend. Some big matches, not least at the Stade Pierre-Mauroy in northern France. We've got Lille against PSG, Marseille against Nîmes, Nantes against Lyon. That's a big one. Strasbourg-Guingamp, a repeat of the Coupe de la Ligue final. Rennes against Nice, which Dave will call the Hatem Bernard for Rico or something. It's a bit like the Balotellico. Saint-Etienne-Bordeaux. Andy, Dave, let me know, where would you like to go next weekend?
Well, yeah, the big game obviously is in Lille, second against first, and PSG have the chance to win the title, so that's the place to be on Sunday night. And given that this is a travel section, first and foremost, I think we should say that Lille obviously is a great place to visit. If you're coming from Paris, like we would be, it's only an hour away on the train. If you're coming from London or Brussels, it's nearby. It's a beautiful place. It's very different to most other cities in France. It's very obviously Flemish influenced. Great place to eat, some great restaurants, great places to visit, the Musée des Beaux-Arts. And the stadium is pretty easily accessible by train, by metro. So there you go. You'll be there in no time, and then you'll be on the train again, heading home first thing the next morning to work.
Pretty good. Dave?
I'd be quite happy with a team outing for this one for once. We can all leave our shared commentator's house together, maybe have an evening out in Lille after the match.
No, I'm gonna head back to Rennes, have some galette saucisses, fellas, and see Rennes against Nice, because Ben Arfa at the moment is just worth the admission fee on his own. That is it then for this week. I do hope you've enjoyed. And like I say, email in your questions, league1podcast@gmail.com. From Andy Scott, from David Crossan, and from me, Matt Spiro. It's time to wish you a very good week, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Oh, the pass is brilliant for Pepe. That's over.
Saint-Etienne has surely won it in the 89th minute.
Ahead. Oh, what a goal.
And Kylian Mbappe wraps it up.